Hi, everybody. We don't have a moderator, so we'll moderate ourselves, I guess. Habiba has lost her voice today, but she's turned up and she's going to read for you, which I think is amazing. Should we just read each of us for about 8 minutes or so, and then we'll talk. 8 minutes because that's when attention starts to wander and we don't want to torture people. It's hot, you know. Who's starting?
Hello. Hello. Hello, everybody. I've never read without a voice, so landscape is very important to me because I write about a landscape I don't live in. So my true landscape is language. This is a poem that says that landscape is passing into language. My grandfather was the first to build his house on this vlei. Vlei is an Afrikaans word for lake. My grandfather was the first to build his house on this vlei. The call of frogs measuring the evening. This was the wild around which my grandfather made a fence, my grandmother a garden. Everything from the kitchen went into the compost, except lemons and oranges, the soil already too acid for roses to grow. Now, the sounds are gone, and the landscape is passing into language. A cement canal directs the river, and only the high school carries the name Groenvlei, Green Lake. Few people remember the sounds of night as frogs and silence. Tell me what you see. In the small caravan parked permanently next to the traffic department with a handwritten sign, ID photos taken here, its wheels rusted into place. The young old photographer with dreadlocks and a tired poet's face is shaking his head from side to side, muttering some version of no. "What kind of photographer are you?" asks a woman ahead of me. "You don't make the people smile." "I just do my job, lady, then I get out of here. You would also be like this if you worked here." "No, you mustn't let them change you, my boy. I would still be smiling." "Yeah, maybe for the first 2 months, but then they drive you crazy." Just before me in the caravan, a woman in a long black skirt and black veil unties the loop of fabric knotted at the back of her neck, and her face briefly emerges. The young old photographer sees everything. Hundreds of unclaimed photos line the inside of his caravan, the making of identity interrupted and turned into small, sad sounds of something else. We don't look at each other, so we look at the walls, at the faces no one came to collect. Someone stands and someone offers their seat. Exact change. I sit on the plastic bar stool and he takes my picture with a small digital camera like the one you take holiday photos with. No tripod except his legs and arms, and the background behind me, the faded fawn of the caravan wall that disappears anyway in the end. Why do we all hate our ID photos? Our faces without spectacles, hair tucked behind the ears, eyes too wide. The moment our identity is being made. The photographer runs a small HB photo printer on a car battery, humming constantly like the cues and the questions and the promises of whatever keeps this government building working. Back inside the hall with its plastic chairs, a man ahead of me presses his finger onto the ink blotter, a million index fingers before him. Then he leans his forehead against the eye test machine. "Tell me what you see," the officer says. To clean the ink from his thumb, she gives him a single square of toilet paper torn carefully at the perforated line. In the last queue to pay for my temporary license, I slide 4 photos, my ID book, completed form, and exact change into the metal slot under the glass. "Ma'am, put your thumb on the ink pad and place it inside the block." She watches me sign in the right place and pastes a strip of sellotape over my name, fixing my identity for 6 months at least. So we just talked about migration, and you know, Africans are one of the migrants the world wants least. So let me tell you what it was like to be an African in Belgium, in a very, very privileged place, watching other Africans being despised and rejected. Stone skin. In the castle, the statues stiffen with perfection. Outside the stone walls, the Senegalese immigrants hold out their hands full of roses and good fortune. The boy lays his small foot on marble, light and eternal. The Madonna holds his head on her lap, but outside, the gestures of the hands are not aesthetic, are not silent. At night, the stone wall keeps in its place, and outside, the silence, the growing silence. Okay, last poem is about my mother. My mother is about this size, 1.5 meters, actually not even 1.5 meters tall. And she, in the 1950s, just 8 years after apartheid started, was a remarkable working class girl who was so clever she made it into medical school at a time when black people were assumed not to have brains. Right? She is, of course, my muse, but she doesn't really want to be my muse. She wants to be the writer herself. So we have debates about that. This is one of many poems that she has inspired. No name. Do you have products here in India that are cheaper than other products because they don't have a brand name? You have that? In South Africa, we call those no-name brands, okay? No name. My parents only bought in bulk or on discount. No-name brands. They saved up for years, saying no to all our requests, then bought everything in cash, even the car. Eventually, we learned not to ask for things, not even to want them. Even desire was pared from us. Our salt was no name, our milk, our clothes, ourselves. Through those plain white boxes with blue writing, the label of no money fell on us, stuck to our skin, told us that we ourselves were generic and interchangeable. No name was clear on our bodies. To not matter at the level of the skin was the law under apartheid, but to not matter at the level of what we wore and ate, that cut deeper than law. Now, after all those decades of discipline, something is loosening, being overwritten by the body and the present. My mother grumbles about a spoon or a duk she cannot find in the endless maelstrom of the house, and I try to solve the loss by repeating something I've heard from her all my life. Dayasma dunya sahuta. These are only earthly things. But I am on the earth, she replies, suddenly unanswerable. Yes, she is on the earth, and Parkinson's has given her permission to turn to what has been refused, deferred, forbidden, not now. Not non-white. The power of that negative, that emptiness against the fullness of white. No. During apartheid, we created a potent no of our own in order to resist, to struggle. We understood that to withdraw ourselves, to disappear deliberately, to call attention to our absence would make our non matter. If we don't exist for you, we bargained, how does it feel when our money, our labor, our present doesn't? Our potent no's grew and boycotts cut against the non and against the non-existence of us. We screamed against the blank, the no name. We refused. We said no to the non. But it was not yes. A no against non is not yes. It was still raging against. And on the other side was fullness, desire, yes. To us who had been made into fractions, into nothing, into not on this earth, being black offered a new home, a fullness, and yet it was a public fullness, a fullness for the era of privation. So we had no, we had boycotts, we withdrew into our complex silences and absences, but behind them was a private hurt, the hurt of the non. And so upon freedom, no did not protect us from a certain emptiness. When freedom came, we thought our public fullness was enough. We thought we were ready for the pell-mell factories of desire and debt. We learned to speak ever finer and finer languages of existence, and we felt in our blood, in our bones, in our being, that existence lay in labels, in brands, in names. We rejected homemade food for restaurant buffets and wines with mythical price tags. We shuddered from the shame of rough hems sewn by our mothers after work and discarded them for the machine-made ones, even in my house, where my father was a tailor and my mother worked for the unions, and we could recite facts about labor conditions and open borders and product dumping and job losses. But what we knew consciously was nothing to what we knew in our skin. In the old days, I would walk into a shop in Cavendish Square, 2 houses from the road, from Ingle Road, where my family was removed from. By the way, apartheid, it didn't only classify you by race. It prevented you from having sex with one another across race, marrying one another across race, or living in the same neighborhood. And if you originally lived in a mixed neighborhood and you were black, you were removed from that neighborhood, and you lost that forever. And that forced removal is what happened to my family a year before I was born. And that my family lived 2 roads away from a big shopping center where we used to go and buy our food afterwards. So in the old days, I would walk into a shop in Cavendish Square, 2 streets from the house in Ingle Road that my family was removed from. And already, by the way I inhabited my body, I showed them that I didn't belong there because I was no name. Now, I can walk up to the shop assistant and hand her what I desire and pay for it, go into debt for it, and know that it is mine, that it is me. I am not generic and not no name, not nothing. Don't tell me that these small hurts don't matter, that our private emptiness doesn't count. Every label visible on the outside of a garment is a scream against none. In freedom, we wear brands on our skin until we believe what they say, until no one can tell by our clothes who exists and who does not. We buy our existence. Our bodies clothed in labels, we ourselves become brands and names. At last, we are not nothing. We are a name. We exist. On this earth. I am on this earth.
Thanks so much, Habiba. If I'd lost my voice, I wouldn't have done that. You know, I would have stayed in the hotel. Give her a hand, folks. Next up is Anupama Raju. She's going to read from a book called Bitter Gourd. Oh, see, and book of poems that was launched yesterday, right? Bitter Gourd, and starting with a novel called Sea.
So this is from my novel Sea, and it's a novel written in prose and poetry. First, I'd like to know, how many of you enjoy train journeys? Okay, great. What about the metro or the subway? Oh, you like that too, all right. So let's hope this resonates with you. Mind the gap. As soon as the train glides out of sea, the landscape miraculously changes from dark to light. So talking of landscapes, this novel is about this fictional city called Sea. And this particular sea has no sun, so it's in perpetual darkness. As soon as the train glides out of sea, the landscape miraculously changes from dark to light. The cows I see outside are suddenly mooing from the book in my hands. I relish my unpoetic license, the delightful delirium of encountering daylight after a hiatus. The underbelly of the megalopolis is a fascinating, multi-layered maze, a far cry from languorous sea. If you were to cut a slice, you would see lines and passages cutting across each other like nerves. Through these pass multitudes of people of different shapes, sizes, genders, and skin tones, yet they all look the same. And they all share one purpose: getting to wherever they want to go as quickly as possible. They don't mind their manners, nor the gap. These bodies, swaying to the rhythm of the insomniac snake, these children of the hourless city, feet, coats, nails and all, the movers and the moved, the pushers and the shoved, the old and the young, men, women and dogs, bags, umbrellas and poetry, eyes down, nose up. These are the citizens of the underworld, 100 feet under. When they emerge into the day, into the world above, they scatter like grains and disappear into the city. Here the sun shines, lighting up the darkest corners, the old buildings, parks, towers, churches, the conspicuous high-rises, and the broad river that lies like a colorless sari waiting to be folded. From here, the narrative moves to something slightly more personal, especially with reference to a particular relationship and what the sun can do to the relationship. The scarcity principle. Once I told you I must apply the scarcity principle. The less I'm available, the more you would seek me. The more I hide, the less you're likely to disappear, I said. Sparse as hair, scanty as God, sporadic as the monsoon, infrequent as sanity. If I could become scarce, then you would value me, I said. But love, why would you do that, you asked. Scarce or abundant, it's not quantity that matters, it's quality, remember? Damn it, I hate it when you're right. And a little poem that is, in a sense, an evocation of the Kerala landscape. Cut, copy, paste. The glass postcard gleams dull. Rooftops like rows of teeth that need to be brushed clean. But the two gulls seem all right. I drop the C lightly, discreetly, as they sit pasted on the postcard, arrogant, knowing they've been written about. I could just peel them off the glass and paste them on Kerala tiles. There, the orange-brown roofs may be a tad too bright for their beady eyes, their largeness a threat to the local kites. Now I look over my shoulder and see they have gone. I wonder which postcard they're now sitting on. So now I'll read some poems from my new book. As Jeet said, this was launched in Trivandrum yesterday, and it's available at the bookstore as well. Let me begin with the poem Malayalam. This is a poem I wrote for my parents. I don't know how many of you here are Malayalis. Okay, do you speak Malayalam? Read it, write it? Okay, I'm not as fortunate as you, alas. But I do speak it well. I can also read. But this is a poem dedicated to the Malayalam of my parents. Malayalam for my parents. I don't remember the first word I heard, but I must have listened to the songs you sang even before the two of you met. Each tune young as your Malayalam. Every sound plump and full as the l falling from your mouths as you called me Mole. Mole. Daughter, girl, female. I was me first in your Malayalam, pink as a newborn, young as your Malayalam. Perhaps that was the first word I heard. Every time you went away to sing in faraway lands, you left 3 sounds behind. Mole. And every time someone called me Mole after that, it reminded me of your voices calling out to me from upstairs. I grow old. There's grey I try to hide. But each time you call me Mole, I'm as young as your Malayalam, tender as Ilanir, soft as Panni, haunting as Pulluvan Pattu. Call me mole, everyone. Daughter, girl, female, I choose to remain young as your Malayalam. This one was written during the pandemic. I'm sure a lot of you would relate to the sentiment, if not the poem. When we were stuck in our homes inside the four walls, getting on each other's nerves, especially if you had only your partner, and that's all you could do, right? You could just rave and rant, sometimes loudly, sometimes silently. So this one is about something to do with that. Again, who likes idlis? Okay. After this, I still hope you like idlis. Planning dinner. There's batter in the fridge anyway, enough to last a week for two. Idlis are great, but too cumbersome. Their molds pile, grate in the sink, steel scrubs, screams shrill. Soft mounds turn surly in the end. Idlis are not as easy as you think. Supple, warm, plump. They soak up sambar only if they ferment, as long as swear words that linger unsaid, unheard in the tap water, now gushing out loud, loud enough for the neighbors to know it's idlis for dinner. So no idlis tonight. Let's settle for dosa. Let's go round and round. Leave a sizzle here, a dribble there. Crisp enough for you? I saw some smiles in between, so maybe some of you related to it, especially the swear words. Cleaning the house. Saturdays are for cleaning and writing. I begin without map or warning, moving in circles, gathering dust and dirt, a week's cobweb gobbling more than spiders. Sometimes I return to the same spot, sweep under the dining table, pick up nothing. I sprinkle some dust. Floors need footprints. Furniture needs proof of life. So I wipe them clean, except for the coffee mug stains. Spotless is lifeless. I must write too, as ideas settle on the corner coffee table. The broom, the dusting cloth, and mop sit beautifully in my hands. Their hold is real. Their hold is real. Much more than words that reveal. If all poetry is protest, I protest poetry, this word that could have been blood, home, privacy, hate, wound, gun, identity, freedom, heresy. I protest metaphors of love, dark alleyways where a woman could have been screaming dissent, tongue untied. If all poetry is protest, I protest ordinary longings, lines that could be wrinkles gathered over years of silence on a face I know well. I protest sentiment where should have been a question, why do I write? I conclude with a poem again dedicated to my mother. But if she was in the audience, she wouldn't be very happy. Your hands. I wouldn't mind being a little girl again, holding your hands, visiting that store in T Nagar. Your hands knew everything back then. To wave reluctantly on my first day at school, surprised I didn't weep seeing you leave. But I must have needed you, because that night you took me to the store, my hands firmly in yours. I was happy in the knowledge of your hands. And when I suddenly couldn't find you, nothing was more terrifying than your lost hands. Your hands knew everything back then. To pack egg noodles and tomato rice for lunch, whip up brain omelets and Scotch eggs, make prawns fry and feed us rice rolled in its spice. They made up for the moments you weren't there. You punished me every now and then, but I don't remember much of it. You were a devoted wife, much to my frustration, and seldom stood by me in my angst. But your hands knew everything back then. Collected exquisite kanjivarams for my wedding, picked out my lingerie and my handkerchiefs. Your temper was famous and your moods unpredictable. You weren't a great role model if I wanted to be a mother, but your hands knew everything. We are both old now. You still roam the streets of T Nagar, waiting to choose things for me. Your hands seem to know less these days, but I love their smallness, their rounded ignorance. Someday I will place my hands in your hands again, and I will let go to see if I'm as frightened as back then. Thank you.
Anupama Raju, thanks so much. I'm going to read or say some poems from an early book called English. These aren't poems as much as kind of entries in a guide, a kind of a guide to be other than human, I guess. And I'm going to see if I remember the poems. This is called How to Be a Toad. Take 3 fresh spores with a dram of rum. Hold it on your tongue for longish moments. Pack all thoughts of gold in a small leather case the size of a sapphire. Tell yourself repeatedly, I will never again be beautiful. How to be a leaf. Hold your breath until you are God's green thoughts. Stop eating. The air will suffice for food. Water is another matter. The skin absorbs nutrients. The eyes adjust. Limbs grow inward. Conjugate patience. Worship women and trees. How to be a horse. Know the nostril. All power gathers there. Inflate yours until the blood rings. It will take all your training to be horse, not ass. This is a thin crossing, perilous to the absent-minded and the estranged of heart. Avoid all latitudes, which you'll instantly know is a reference to the horse latitudes, right? Where when the Spanish galleons got caught on the seas with no wind, the first things they would throw overboard were the horses. They came to be called the horse latitudes. How to be a crow. Learn to name the animals one by one. Stinking, babbling, breedy, querulous, maddened, jet. Usurp the duties of God. Why not? After all, this is what poets do. As for crow, turn black. kill color. Thank you. I don't know if you know what a bandicoot is here in Kerala. I don't think you have them, do you? Yeah? Oh, okay. So you know. Enormous rats. Unkillable. You can't drown them. They know how to swim. You can't poison them. They have poison for breakfast. Drop them from a tall building, they'll bounce. You probably need to use a shotgun, but I doubt if they're even killable with lead. Anyway, how to be a bandicoot. Assume dominance over the underworld. Your enemies are legion. Eat them. Eat everything. You must build your strength. A crash will surely come. Your eyes are red legends. Your name is Adam. I'm going to read from a new collection of early poems which has been published with an index of first lines, and I'm going to see what it sounds like to read the index as if it were a poem. Index of first lines. A man of 63 on his back, a painted pear hangs by her bed. All right, I admit it, I am struggling, I am. Arched and pitched to light, tight as a talking drum. Assume dominance at most famous Kathmandu, at river's edge. Body remembers blood beating, born in a hamlet near the southern hymn. Color the horned snail. Dearly beloved, found myself at home. Finally he stands by the bed where lately they lay. Here I stand for the seventh and last time. Here we stand, steps away. Hold your breath until how much harder it is to speak. I am on a street already somewhere, could not leave that it got to me. I spoke to you in many. I step off the plane, I touch myself, know the nostril, learn to name the animals. Life, said Hobbes, is nasty, brutish, and short. There's more, but I'll stop there. I'm going to read a poem called... Since we're in Kerala, it's called Malayalam's Ghazal, and I'm going to borrow your copy, if I may, of, about our great leaders in Delhi. It's called Shock Attack. You think you're smart, but you don't know jack. You open your mouth and the shocks attack. You push at us, we push you back. Saffron, you say, is the brand new black. Saffron, you say, is the brand new black. Saffron, you say, is the brand new black. Your beard so long, your poison packed. You know the way the chips are stacked. If you don't go straight, you go back to black. If you fly too low, you catch that flack. Oh, you think you're good, but you're so whack. Saffron, you say, is the brand new black. You got the scratch that you can't itch. You've got that scratch that you can't itch. You say saffron is your brand new bitch. Some call it misery. Some call it happiness. Some call it fakery. Some call it governance. What do you call it? What do you? I call it poverty. What do you? You call prosperity? What do you? You call integrity, what do I? I call skullduggery, what do you? What do you call it when the sharks attack? What do you call it when we push you back? What do you call it when you're poison packed? What do you call it when the chips are stacked? What do you call it? What do you? What do you call it? Brand new black. Thanks so much.
So my question is to the panel, I was listening to the inauguration poem by Amanda Gorman, and I felt moved by it. But there were a lot of discussions about how it's not a poem, or is that how a poem is supposed to be written? And I felt that that was unwarranted. There were lots of, who decides what a poem is? But there was another controversy regarding a YouTuber who released a poem called Gabby Hannah, and I read one of it, and I felt maybe rules are needed. So what do you think about, what are your stands on, should there be rules, and is there a middle ground on what a poem is and what is not?
Thanks for that question. Do you want to take it? I think the House of Poetry is large and inclusive and spacious and welcoming. So I don't think anyone really has the right to say this is a poem and this is not, because opinions, as we know, are plentiful and often really tell us nothing, you know. So if you think it's a poem, it's a poem. That's what I think. Again, purely an opinion.
Hi, my question is to Mr. Jeet. It's not a question. Actually, I recently bought a book of Penguin selected Indian poets. It was edited by you. So I just would like to know what was the thought process went behind in the selection of poems, or I know it was a tedious process as well as an enriching experience. But how did the selection took place? What was the criteria? Something like that. I would just like to know.
The first version of that book appeared in 2005. I started work on it in 2003. And then there was another version, two versions in 2008. One for Penguin, it was called 60 Indian Poets, and one for Blood Axe, a publisher in the UK, called the Blood Axe Book of Contemporary Indian Poetry. And then 15 years later, in 2022, this book appeared, the Penguin Book of Indian Poets. And it's a culmination, really, of 20 years of work, a selection of the poets that appeared in the previous anthologies, as well as a lot of new poets that I thought were redefining what poetry was in the 21st century. And also a lot of the poets that were in the previous books didn't make it into this one because we did have a page limit, and it went up to something like 900 plus pages. I think I should probably not say this because it's not fair to the other books I've written, but I think that anthology is possibly the book I'm proudest of, and I think it'll be relevant for at least the next 10 or 15 years. And I think whoever you might be, if you are interested in poetry, and if poetry touches you and you respond to language, you will find poems in this collection that will turn you on.
I wonder, in a complex, at-risk place like India, what is the radical possibility of that kind of anthologizing work? That, I mean, you use the word Indian, right? So potentially that is a national frame. But just holding it in my hands and beginning to read it, I have the feeling that you were remaking that frame of the national, and even beyond your own work, I wonder what is the possibility that lies in anthologizing or bringing together artwork under this thing that is associated with extreme violence and exclusion and betrayal. But you have used the word Indian in this way. What is your vision of that?
The thing is, for a long time, Indian poets and critics who wrote about Indian poetry would qualify the word Indian poetry, the phrase Indian poetry, with all kinds of other things. For example, poetry written by Indians in English, and various other really clumsy versions of this, you know, Indian writing in English by blah, 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 sort of really clunky and clumsy attempts at explaining something really very simple. An Indian poet who writes poetry, an Indian who writes poetry is writing Indian poetry, whatever language that might be in. So I just thought to simplify it and to call it what it is, we'll call it Indian poetry. And also complicate the idea of Indian poetry by including poets from all over the world, some of whom have never, certainly not been born here and haven't even visited here. But when you read them juxtaposed with poets who live in India and have always lived in India, you see a genetic kind of connection there. And it's quite uncanny, the resonances that arise as you turn the pages of that book. I'm still astonished by it, really. And the placement isn't chronological. It's not according to birth year. It's according to resonance, a kind of a verticality, so that the deeper you go, the more you see the connections between, when you look at one poet, you see the connections between that poet and the poet before and after. And that, I think, continues right through the 900 plus pages of that book. Thanks for that question.
Ma'am, Gabeba, ma'am, I would like to say something about the poem that you read out, where you mentioned about the no-name brands. Here, I think we as Indians are also able to relate. Somewhere we are from different nations, but countries like ours where social security is lower and we have to rely on our savings, this kind of memories or our memoryscapes converge at these points. We kind of identify with these kind of memories where we are asked to be misers, or like this kind of belief is ingrained in us that after a point it becomes us. We forget that that we are able to buy things. We in Indian brands, or like when other MNCs come to India, they focus on the marketing strategies like where people can get cheaper products with, you know, things cheap. They just make them realize that things are cheaper from their brands, so that people buy it. It is not for the brand sake or for the name sake that people buy things. These kind of habits, I think, are common to both of our nationalities.
Thank you so much for your attention and your patience. I think you should give yourselves a hand.